Are you ready to break free from the doubts and limits holding you back? Welcome to Embrace Your Value, where therapy meets coaching to help you unlock your true worth and take control of your life.
Hi, I'm Kristen, a trauma therapist dedicated to helping you heal, break old patterns, and reclaim your power.
And I'm Jen, your support coach, here to show you how to set fierce boundaries, embrace self compassion, and step boldly into the life you deserve.
So, whether you're stuck in self doubt or feeling lost, know this: your value isn't up for negotiation. It's time to own it.
Every week, we tackle real issues that challenge, inspire, and empower you to live with purpose and confidence.
So, grab your favorite drink, take a deep breath, and let's get started.
Because you're not here to play small, it's time to embrace your value.
Welcome back to Embrace Your Value. Jen and I are here today, and we want to talk about embracing change, how to stop resisting and start thriving. So, when we talk about embracing change, we have to also think about, do we know when change is necessary, and are we fighting against it? So, a question to the listeners: have you ever known deep down that you needed to change something and constantly fought against it? So I'd like for you all to think about that while we're going through this podcast.
Yeah. And so I know for me, I can tell you, I knew change was necessary when I decided to go back to college and get my degree. I was in a job that I didn't necessarily love, I didn't necessarily hate. I loved certain parts of it. And it was just, but it just seemed like it was getting more toxic by the day. And there was just this without a doubt moment where I was like, okay, if I don't do something now, I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. I'm going to be a miserable woman and I am never going to do anything different. And that was probably I felt it so much in my soul. And I just got online and I registered for school. And then I texted my husband and said, oh, by the way, I'm going back to school. Hope that's okay. And so when we started talking about that was like the big thing that I knew if I didn't make that move, nothing would change for me. Deep down, this was my moment for change.
I have a similar but different story. When I chose to go back to school, that was a huge thing that I resisted change. But then I think even on a bigger note for me was when I moved out of the community mental health field and into private practice. That was a huge, like, I had to really push myself super hard. So here's the thing. Why do we do this? Why does something that we know that is so constant, which is change, right? It's like the one thing that we always know is going to happen. Nobody can get out of life without some kind of change, right? Even if we're just a day older. Why does that feel so hard? So that's something I want us to talk about today.
Yeah, I think it feels hard because it's scary. It's scary to try something new. I actually just did a TikTok about this yesterday. I was talking about limiting beliefs, but it's the same thing because if you have this belief that something's got to go this way. So for me, going back to school, the reason it took me 30 years to go get my college education was because I had a limiting belief that I wasn't book smart, that I couldn't learn things that way, and I wasn't successful in a school system, that I couldn't sit in a classroom and learn anything. And so I resisted for a long time because it was scary. It was going to be hard. I assumed I was going to fail. Like all of those things come up around it. And until we prove it wrong, we find that evidence that says that's not it, we won't really make that change. So we have to try the thing, the scary thing. And so that's what I did. I took one class and I aced it and I did really well. And it was like, oh, and then it was like, but I really liked that class. So then it was like, okay, I can do really well if I like the material. But that was a step forward. And so then the next time, the next quarter, I took two classes. One of them was like not in my comfort zone. And I was like, oh, so I can learn things and not like it. Okay. So it was just a process for me, but it was getting over that fear and proving it wrong.
So, yeah, one good reason we resist change and it's uncomfortable is because of fear of the unknown, or maybe it's fear of losing control. So, fear of failure, fear of judgment, thinking about fear of failure. What if I mess up? Fear of judgment. What will people think? Like, those were some of the things that you were speaking to. Here's a big one: identity shifts, right? If I change, who am I now? So even though you were doing something fantastic, it was going to change who you are to a certain extent and how you felt about yourself.
Yeah. And it did actually. It changed me a lot. The thing is, that one never even entered my mind. Because I guess for me, it was scarier to stay where I was than to change. I needed to change my identity. That was the part that I craved, that I needed. It was scarier to stay in the job I was in and deal with the things I was dealing with than to move forward.
And that's when change happens, right? That's literally one of the most common reasons that things change, is because where we are is so intolerable and it's so awful and it's so scary that we get over that fear of change and we move towards it. As we continue, I would love for our listeners to think of a change they have been avoiding. And while we're working through this, start thinking about why you've been avoiding that. So, one way to look at this is to shift from fear to opportunity, right? So, what if instead of dreading change, we started welcoming it? Reframe it as excitement. Did you know, Jen and we've been talking about embodiment. So, but did you know that fear and excitement feel the same in our bodies? The same.
Yes, and that's why your nervous system can dysregulate when you're excited and when you're upset. Like it can feel the same way. And so, one of the things that I had a coach teach me was that our path is never linear, it's always got valleys and hills. And her example for that was, you want the valleys and the hills to be minimal, not great big peaks and great big lows and highs. And yeah, absolutely. The more level you can make those valleys and hills, the more you can regulate your nervous system and stay in that peace, keep that peace in your body.
Yes, I think regulating your nervous system, if we could teach all the children one thing, just one thing as 3, 4, 5, 6 year olds, to just regulate their nervous system, to breathe, to get down into their body and say, you know what, this is awkward, this is strange, and I can welcome it and I can be okay. When I walked into my son's third grade classroom, I looked on the wall, and one of the rules, because every little classroom has rules, one of the rules was, I can be okay even when others are not.
I love that.
And I thought to myself, and you can teach my child one thing this year, I want it to be that.
Yes.
Because we just have to learn to be okay no matter what's happening around us. And Jen, you and I we have training in being able to hold people in their discomfort, right? So we maybe have a little bit of a leg up on this, at least professionally. It's always harder to do in our personal lives. But just think about having the power to hold people in their discomfort so that they can ride the hills and the valleys and know that they can be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you a story as somebody who does hold a lot of space for people. And that I can do. When my clients come to me, I can hold space for them. I can deal with that. I cannot let it affect the rest of my life. But when there's something big going on for somebody that I deeply love, that I cannot do anything about, like I'll just share a quick example. I'm not going to give any names. I don't know if my niece listens to this podcast. Thankfully, I have a couple of them, so they won't know. She will know who I'm talking about, but they won't all know. And her son was having a medical issue. And I was devastated. He was a baby. And I was like, I can't, they're hours away. I can't be there to help them. I can't do anything besides pray and just be here. And at the same time, a dear friend of mine was going through a medical thing, and there was just all this piling on. And I was a complete wreck. And I had to reach out to my coach, and I was like, help me regulate this. I can't do it on my own. I'm like, I felt like I was suffocating. And so she was helping me work through it. And it's okay. It's okay. I guess what I'm getting at in this story is it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to go, oh, I need support on this. Because sometimes even the best of us that have had this training, when it piles on and you've got so much going on, you can't get out of the middle of it. You've got to have some support. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
And here's why I love it, because if you can trust yourself to ask for help, to make good decisions, to discern what is best for you or not best for you. If you can trust yourself and trust the process, again, this is something that we hold clients in all the time. But what would happen if you believed that you could handle anything? That no matter what came your way, you'd be like, I got this. And if I don't, I know somebody who does. And I
yeah,
know somebody who's got
change
me.
everything.
It would change everything.
It does change everything. But if I think to myself, oh, don't worry, I've got it and I don't ever need any help, I'm a puddle in the corner over there and I don't accomplish anything. Because asking for help and knowing the difference between when you can support yourself and when you need support is priceless.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. Let's talk about how we navigate change with grace. So I think people, maybe we've gotten people a little open to receiving change, to letting it be something it already will be. But how do we get through it without going crazy or losing our minds? So one thing that I use in session a lot is, what's the worst that can happen? Oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job, Kristen. I'm so scared. Like, I don't know what to do. Okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? I'll lose my job and then I won't be able to pay my bills. And then we go all the way down and we go, okay, could you handle that? Could you handle that maybe you have to wait a couple months to pay your mortgage? Not great, but not the worst thing that could happen. Right? So we just have to wrap our minds around what's really going on here in this moment and what does that mean for me. So that's the one I love. I don't know what you use, Jen.
I will tell you, I do use that, but I use it a little differently
Mm-hmm.
because I have them go through the worst case scenarios. What are the worst case scenarios? And we write them down. And then we do talk about it and what does that look like. But what I have them do is write it on a piece of paper that has nothing else on it. And I'm like, great, throw that away. You got all the worst case scenarios out of your head. Because sometimes that's really the issue. And I always remind them sometimes it's going to happen, but it's usually never as bad as your worst case scenario.
Right.
So that's where I go with that. But the other thing that I really do is I always look at change from the power of small steps.
Mm.
What is the smallest step you can take right now to start this change? I never encourage them I'll usually say, okay, what's the true outcome? So, like for me going back to school, honestly, I thought my outcome was to I wanted to have my own business. So I think that was always going to be the outcome. But I went back to school to get my business degree and bookkeeping certification. And I wanted to be like an accountant or a bookkeeper. And I thought I could run my own bookkeeping practice. That's not for me. But I took small steps. I enrolled in one class. And then I continued working towards that degree. And then I even took on a client in as a bookkeeper. And I was like, okay, this is not for me. This is not what I want to do. But it led me to different things. So always that small step. What does that look like? You can have a goal, but the path isn't always going to lead you to where you think you're going in 3 years because it changes. Again, it changes. It's so flexible that you can say, okay, I know what I'm working towards, but I also know that there could be a fork in the road, that there could be an S curve, that there could be all these different things along my path that I'm going to move alongside of and do things differently. Small changes or small steps, I think, are the best way to start change because or one of the best ways. They're not the only, but I think they're just so important because if you try to take a big step, that fear gets back in there, right? And then we're like, oh, I can't do it, or I failed, or I fell, or whatever. And a small step, just what's the smallest thing you can possibly do to make this happen today and get it started?
Yeah. And I think sometimes that we can even take another technique and when we're looking at what's the smallest step I can take, and sometimes the smallest step you can take is to just stop, pause, take a breath, just and look at it and say, can I see this from a different angle? And then we go, okay, now what's the next step, right? Let's just do the small things here and there. And they, because they pile up, right? You call it stacking.
Yeah.
Yes. So you stack them up. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes we
you can't stack them
stop.
until you start them.
You got to start. Yes. You have to start it. You can't
Yes.
stop what's not there. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And you can't be 4 steps ahead. You have to start with whatever the first step seems logical. You just start there. And it doesn't matter if it was supposed to be the first step. If it wasn't, you figure that out and you go, oh, I got to back up a little bit. It's okay. It doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're learning. I do not use the word fail. So my clients say they failed. I'm like, did you? Or did you learn lessons? What did you learn? What lesson did I learn out of this? What was I supposed to learn from this? And that's always a really good way to look at change or anything you're doing. I did that too with my job. It was like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this? And I did decide that one of the things I was supposed to learn was it was time to go back to school. It was not time to continue down this path.
Right.
And I was good with that.
Yeah. So we want to reiterate to lean on support, right? Friends and family, seek guidance from professionals, coaches, therapists, mentors, because what if the change you're resisting is actually the breakthrough you need? Just like what you were talking about, Jen, the
Yeah.
change that you did change though, and it wasn't the right path for you. You had to then accept that it wasn't and then move on and go to the next change step.
Yes. But I did resist it for a long time because it was number one, I resisted going back to school for about 20 years, but I was also in this job for 9.5 years where I was back and forth struggling before I went back to school. So I did resist. It was like, no, that wasn't. I was almost like I didn't know the step that I was supposed to take. And once I had it firmly in my head and understood that was it, I felt it throughout my whole body. There's that
Mm,
embodiment. I felt
yeah.
it. And I knew there was nothing that was going to change me stop me from doing it. And I had the same thing with coaching. I had a mentor tell me for years I should look into coaching. And I was just like, I lived by this motto of my opinion was worthless. People don't pay me for my opinion. People don't pay me for what I think. It was worthless. And
Right.
so I just pushed it off and pushed it off. But the day that I knew coaching was where I needed to go, I was in a cathartic release where I was sobbing on the floor. And I knew, like, without a doubt. And again, I signed up for coaching before I talked to my husband. I spent thousands of dollars that day and said, oh, by the way, and thank God he loves me enough to go, it's okay. This is what you need to do. I support you. And he has supported me all along this journey. But for me, I will almost always resist until until it's that deep seated, this is what's right. And you as our listeners, you may be thinking the same thing, but when you know, stop pushing it off. Then it's time to take action and to do it because it's meant for you. And that's all I can say on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would like to invite our listeners to think about if they're going through a major change right now, what's one thing from today's episode that you can use? And remember that change is happening for you. Your story is such a great example. Change is happening for you, not to you,
Yeah.
right? It's happening for you. So if you can embrace that things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you, or maybe even with you, right? For or with, all things can be overcome.
Yes. So I want to take that one step further. In the show notes, drop us a comment and tell us what change you want to make, what change you're resisting, what you need to do, or what that small step is. Tell us what that is, or tell us the worst case scenario. Any of that, but drop something in the show notes that tells us what you're doing because we would love to come back in there and support you. We will come in and leave you a comment or drop us an email and we will email you back because that is really a good way for you to get some quick change because we might have an answer for you or a suggestion or something that you're like, oh, didn't think about that, and we can help you. Maybe the step is too big, we can help you break it down. So let's start that conversation, but you have to come to us first because this is all we know to do is this part, and then you guys come in and start the next part of the conversation. You can also tag us on social media at Embrace Your Value, and we will come in and hang out with you and talk to you on there. We'd love to help.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And we will definitely be in touch and we'll see you next time. Thank you for being here with us today.
If today's episode hit home, don't just keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Because everyone deserves to know their worth.
Next week, we're diving even deeper with more insights and tools to help you break free from limitations and live authentically.
Until then, keep raising your standards, owning your worth, and embracing your value.